The 1978 Ford Mustang II King Cobra, a Malaise Era survivor with swagger. How do you measure the last gasp of a muscle car legend? In 1978, Ford thought it had the answer. Paint a Cobra on the hood, add spoilers, throw in some T-tops, and give the Mustang just enough bravado to disguise the fact that horsepower had become a dirty word. That was the formula behind the Mustang II King Cobra, a limited production halo model designed to keep the pony car myth alive during the darkest years of American performance. The example currently spotted on Facebook Marketplace is more than just a survivor. It's a family-owned machine, ordered new, passed carefully down to a second caretaker, and still showing the same fighting spirit despite more than 100,000 miles on the odometer. In many ways, it represents not just a car, but a story of loyalty, nostalgia, and resilience. To truly understand what this Mustang II King Cobra means today, you need the broader context, the troubled automotive landscape of the 1970s, the shifting identity of America's most famous pony car, and the way this quirky limited edition coupe has clawed its way from obscurity to cult classic. The late 1970s were not kind to enthusiasts. A series of oil crises in 1973 and 1979 shook American car culture to its core. Gasoline prices skyrocketed. Rationing left drivers waiting in endless lines at filling stations. And suddenly cubic inches and tire smoke looked irresponsible. At the same time, the federal government imposed increasingly strict emissions and safety regulations. Automakers scrambled to comply, often strangling engines with primitive emissions equipment that sapped performance. Cars that once delivered 300 or 400 horsepower now limped along with half those numbers. Weight increased thanks to impact bumpers, catalytic converters, and other regulatory add-ons. Insurance companies punished owners of high-performance models with exorbitant premiums, discouraging young buyers from indulging in muscle cars altogether. Ford, like all American automakers, had to adapt. By the early 70s, the Mustang, once the ultimate youth-oriented performance coupe, had grown bloated. The 1971-73 big-body Mustangs were stylish but overweight, more boulevard cruisers than pony cars. When the oil crisis hit, Ford needed a radical rethink. Debuting in 1974, the Mustang II was a clean break from its predecessors. Designed on a platform derived from the Pinto subcompact, it was shorter, lighter, and far more fuel-efficient than the bulky models it replaced on paper. The Mustang II looked like a sensible answer to the times. It was compact, maneuverable, and more in tune with America's new reality of fuel shortages and eco-consciousness. Engines ranged from a thrifty 2.3-liter inline-4 to a 2.8-liter V6, with the beloved 302 cubic-inch V8 making a return in 1975. Sales reflected this strategy. The Mustang II was a hit with the general public. Nearly 386,000 units sold in its debut year, even earning Motor Trend's coveted Car of the Year award. For Ford's accountants, it was a victory, but for die-hard enthusiasts, it was a bitter pill. Gone were the tire-melting Mach 1s and screaming Boss models. In their place stood a polite, economical coupe. For many, the Mustang II felt like a betrayal. By 1978, Mustang II sales were cooling, and its reputation among enthusiasts was in tatters. Ford needed something flashy to remind people that this was still a Mustang. The answer was the King Cobra. Produced in limited numbers, estimates range from about 4,300 to 5,000 units. The King Cobra was the boldest Mustang II ever created. Every example received the 5.0-liter 302 cu in V8, producing a modest 133 horsepower and 239 lb-ft of torque. While those numbers may sound laughable compared to the Boss 429 or Shelby GT500 of a decade earlier, They represented the performance ceiling of the era. But the King Cobra wasn't about raw numbers. It was about image. Every car came with an oversized Cobra snake decal sprawled across the hood, an audacious design that instantly set it apart. Other details reinforced the aggressive look. A front air dam, rear spoiler, bold pinstriping, flared wheel arches, and blackout trim. Buyers could also tick the box for T-top removable roof panels. Adding even more swagger, a 4-speed manual transmission came standard, with an automatic available as an option. Contemporary tests recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour times of around 11 seconds and quarter-mile runs in the high 17s. Hardly earth-shattering, but enough to stand out against the generally sleepy competition of the Malaise Era. The interior of the King Cobra was largely shared with the regular Mustang too, though sporty flourishes helped set the mood. Bucket seats, a center console with a floor-mounted shifter, and a driver-focused dashboard created an environment that at least felt performance-oriented. Buyers could choose from various trims and upholstery colors, with some period examples featuring bold two-tone designs. At $5,700. The King Cobra was the priciest Mustang II you could buy in 1978. That premium bought exclusivity and bragging rights. While the base Mustang II catered to commuters and casual drivers, the King Cobra was for those who still wanted their car to make a statement. The King Cobra, currently on Facebook Marketplace, fits the mold perfectly. Finished in blue with a contrasting brown interior, it checks many of the boxes that make these cars collectible today. Factory 302 V8, 4-speed manual transmission, T-tops, and working air conditioning. The car has been in the same family since new, later passed on to a second caretaker who has continued its story. Over the past 5 years, it has received careful maintenance. Fresh fluids throughout, multiple oil changes to flush the engine, new tires, brake service, a replacement steering rack, new radiator, hoses, thermostat, starter solenoid, and battery. Importantly, the seller has saved the original parts, including the air cleaner, AC components, and radiator. For collectors, originality matters, and this car comes with a paper trail of history. Of course, it isn't flawless. The heater core has been bypassed, and some mechanical issues linger. The seller openly admits it runs and drives, but has some existing problems. But rather than detracting, this transparency adds charm. The car has not been over-restored or locked away as a garage queen. It remains a living artifact of 1970s Ford history, a car that still wants to be driven, tinkered with, and appreciated. For years, the Mustang II was the butt of jokes. Car magazines mocked its Pinto roots. Enthusiasts dismissed its lack of power, and collectors ignored it. Even Ford itself rarely celebrated the Mustang II in marketing campaigns or anniversary retrospectives. But time has a way of changing perspectives. As the more famous Mustangs of the 60s and early 70s skyrocketed in value, enthusiasts began to take a second look at the underdogs of the brand's history. The King Cobra, with its low production numbers and outrageous styling, became a natural focal point. Today, the King Cobra represents something unique, a Mustang that dared to be bold when the odds were stacked against it. It was flamboyant at a time when performance cars were retreating. It was rare compared to the mass-produced bosses and Mach 1s. And it tells a story about survival, not just of the Mustang nameplate, but of American performance culture itself. Values for King Cobras have risen steadily. 10 or 15 years ago, they could be found for a few $1,000s, often neglected or parted out. Today, clean examples command anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000, depending on condition and originality. Exceptional survivors with manuals and complete documentation can reach even higher. Part of this appeal is rarity. With fewer than 5,000 built, the King Cobra is scarcer than many of its better-known Mustang cousins. It also appeals to a new generation of collectors who appreciate the quirkiness of the Malaise era. These buyers aren't necessarily looking for the fastest car. They want something unusual, conversation-worthy, and tied to a specific cultural moment. The Mustang II King Cobra may never rival a Boss 302 or a Shelby GT350 in raw performance or prestige. But that was never the point. Its legacy lies in its role as a bridge. It carried the Mustang name through one of the most difficult decades in automotive history, ensuring the pony car lived long enough to enjoy its rebirth in the 1980s with the Fox body platform. Seen in that light, the King Cobra is more than a flashy decal package. It's a symbol of resilience. It reminds us that car culture has always been about more than just numbers on a dyno sheet. It's about identity, presence, and the stories that cars carry with them. And for the family that has kept this particular King Cobra alive for nearly half a century, those stories are written into every mile, every repair, every moment of care to understand why the Mustang II King Cobra deserves attention. It helps to place it alongside its contemporaries. The late 70s performance landscape was bleak, but every automaker was trying to hold on to the fading muscle car dream. Chevrolet's Camaro Z28, Pontiac's Firebird Trans Am, and Dodge's Aspen R/T were all cut from the same cloth. Bold graphics, spoilers, scoops, and the promise of speed that was often more visual than mechanical. The Camaro Z28 of 1978, for example, carried a 350 cubic inch V8 with 185 horsepower, more powerful than the King Cobra, but still modest compared to its late 60s forebears. Pontiac's Firebird Trans Am, made famous by Smokey and the Bandit, was similarly a showpiece, leaning heavily on its styling and Burt Reynolds-fueled cool factor rather than raw acceleration. Dodge's Aspen R/T and Plymouth Volare Roadrunner played the same game, relying on decals and spoilers to project muscle car swagger even as emissions regulations neutered their power plants. Against this backdrop, the King Cobra fit right in. It wasn't the fastest or the most powerful, but it carried itself with an attitude that made up for the numbers. In many ways, it was Ford's answer to the Trans Am, a car that made you feel like a rebel just by climbing behind the wheel. Period reviews were mixed. Magazines like Car and Driver and Road and Track acknowledged the King Cobra's styling presence but lamented its performance deficit. They saw through the snake decal and aerodynamic add-ons, pointing out that the Mustang II's Pinto-based chassis and modest V8 output limited its true potential. Still, some journalists gave Ford credit for trying, noting that at least the King Cobra looked the part and offered buyers a taste of excitement in otherwise dreary times. For buyers in 1978, perception mattered as much as performance. Owning a King Cobra wasn't about winning drag races, it was about making a statement. It said you were still part of the Mustang tradition, still invested in the image of American performance, even if the horsepower race had temporarily paused. Fast forward to today, and those period criticisms now feel almost irrelevant. Collectors aren't comparing the King Cobra to a Boss 429. They're celebrating it as a time capsule. Its flamboyant styling, rarity, and connection to a misunderstood era make it fascinating. What was once derided as the weakest Mustang is now celebrated as one of the rarest, quirkiest, and most conversation-worthy. Perhaps the most surprising development has been the rise of a passionate Mustang II community. For years, owners of these cars felt like outsiders at Mustang shows dominated by 65 fastbacks and 69 Mach 1s. Many enthusiasts dismissed the two as unworthy of the badge. But in recent years, attitudes have softened and clubs dedicated specifically to the Mustang II have flourished. Events like Mustang Club of America gatherings now welcome II owners with open arms, and online groups celebrate the car's individuality. Owners trade restoration tips, hunt down rare parts, and share stories of keeping their king cobras alive. Some go for period-correct restorations, carefully preserving decals, trim, and interiors. Others embrace modifications, fitting modern suspension or crate engines to give the king cobra the power its looks always promised. This sense of community has given the king cobra a second life. It's no longer just a quirky footnote in Mustang history. It's a centerpiece for people who value underdog stories, who appreciate the courage it took for Ford to keep the pony car alive against all odds. There's a certain romance in rooting for the underdog, and the king cobra embodies that spirit. It wasn't the strongest, the fastest, or the most respected, but it refused to give up. It carried the Mustang name through a period when many performance models disappeared entirely. When you see a king cobra today, you don't just see a Malaise Era Mustang. You see a survivor of a cultural shift, a reminder of how automakers and enthusiasts adapted to changing times. And you see a car that, against all expectations, has earned its place as a collectible icon. So how do you measure the last gasp of a muscle car legend? Maybe not in horsepower or acceleration times, but in survival, in character, and in the audacity to wear a giant Cobra on its hood when the world said muscle cars were dead. The 1978 Ford Mustang II King Cobra is proof that even in the Malaise era, performance could still mean something. Flashy, flawed, but unforgettable, it has matured into a collectible oddity, a king in its own right, wearing the crown of survival with pride.